"I don't talk much, sir, but I can cook." The human shrugged and said, "Works for me." The human stepped onto the alien vessel without a word. The floor hummed beneath his boots, metallic yet strangely warm, and the air smelled faintly of chemicals mixed with something organic. Around him, the crew moved with efficiency and precision, their bodies elongated, eyes sharp and luminescent, and fingers ending in delicate points that made even simple gestures look like precise calculations. He observed them quietly, letting his gaze sweep over the control panels, the glowing displays, and the intricate web of pipes running along the ceiling. His hands stayed at his sides, relaxed, as though he were simply walking through a foreign museum. No one spoke to him for a long moment. The human had been brought aboard as a specialist, a cook, they said, but the aliens had not expected him to be so still, so quiet. Most humans, they had assumed, were loud, constantly talking, gesturing, and explaining everything. This one moved differently. He watched, measured, and waited. When he finally reached the small galley, he glanced at the ingredients laid out on the counter. They were not like anything he had ever seen, yet he could identify their purpose, their potential uses. Some were pungent, almost overwhelming, while others were delicate, soft, and subtle in aroma. He touched them lightly, inhaled their scents, and began arranging them in order. The first alien to speak was a tall, blue-skinned officer with ridges along his jaw. "Are you ready to begin?" he asked. His voice was a series of clicks and hums which the human understood only partially, but he nodded politely. "Yes," he said simply, his voice calm, almost melodic in its quietness. The alien blinked once, not sure if that was affirmation or confusion. The human began chopping, mixing, and stirring with a rhythm that felt almost like a dance. His movements were deliberate but graceful, precise without being mechanical. Every ingredient was touched lightly, measured intuitively, and placed with care. As he worked, he studied the aliens' reactions. One of them flinched at a smell, another's eyes widened slightly at a texture. Without speaking, the human adjusted the seasoning, changed the temperature, and altered the timing. He worked in silence, yet his understanding of the crew's needs became clear with every subtle tweak. By the time the first dish was ready, the aliens were leaning closer, curious despite themselves. The human set the tray down with care and gestured for them to taste. One of the officers hesitated, uncertain, but finally took a sample. His eyes widened and he blinked in surprise. Another took a bite and emitted a sound that the human recognized as delight. They had not expected such skill, not from someone so quiet. The human shrugged lightly, a small smile on his lips. "Works for me," he said softly. Over the next few hours, he continued cooking, each dish more intricate than the last. He experimented subtly, adding tiny touches here and there, and the aliens' reactions grew more animated. They began to discuss among themselves, pointing and gesturing, their earlier skepticism melting into fascination. The human did not speak much, only occasionally offering a comment or answering a question with a simple nod or a quiet word. Yet his presence seemed to shift the energy in the room. Where tension had once lingered, curiosity and cautious admiration began to grow. The ship's captain, a large, armored alien with dark green skin and a face marked by long scars, finally appeared in the galley. He watched the human work, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You are not like other humans," he said, his voice low and measured. The human paused, wiping his hands on a towel. "I do what I can," he replied simply. The captain's eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not speak further. He had been observing many species, and yet this human was different. There was a quiet confidence about him, not loud or aggressive, but unmistakable. The kind that could be dangerous if underestimated. Later, while the human cleaned his station, an alarm blared across the ship. Red lights flashed, and the floor vibrated faintly beneath their feet. The crew moved quickly, their precision honed by years of experience, but the human did not panic. He watched as alarms indicated a problem in the life support system, a chemical imbalance threatening the atmosphere of the ship. He glanced at the panels, noting the changes in pressure, temperature, and oxygen levels. Then he walked calmly toward the storage room, inspecting containers, scanning labels, and mentally mapping out what could be done. Some of the aliens watched him nervously. One hissed, "What is he doing?" Another shook his head, unsure why a cook would be allowed near critical systems. The human, however, did not hesitate. He began combining substances, using cooking techniques adapted to stabilize the life support system. He heated, mixed, and poured with care, applying knowledge that no alien had considered useful outside the kitchen. Minutes passed, and the tension in the room grew. The alarms continued to scream, and the crew's anxiety mounted. Then slowly the lights shifted from red to yellow, and the vibrations lessened. The human adjusted one last mixture, poured it into the main vent, and stepped back. The alarms stopped. Silence fell, heavy and tense, before a single officer broke it with a sound of astonishment. "He did it," he whispered. The human nodded lightly, wiped his hands, and said, "Works for me." Again, no one quite knew how to react. They were relieved, yes, but also unsettled. He had solved a critical problem without fighting, yelling, or commanding. He had done it quietly, intelligently, and efficiently. The captain approached at last. His eyes were sharp, scanning the human for any sign of weakness or trickery. "Explain yourself," he demanded. The human shrugged slightly. "Observation, understanding." "Application," he said simply. "I cook, I watch, I act when necessary." The captain's gaze lingered, assessing. Finally, he grunted, a sound of reluctant approval. "Perhaps humans are more capable than we assumed," he muttered. The human only nodded, returning to his cleaning, as though the conversation were over. Over the following days, life on the ship shifted subtly. The crew began to notice the small things, the way he arranged equipment for efficiency, how he anticipated the needs of others, and how his quiet presence seemed to calm even the most anxious officers. Even those who had doubted him at first found themselves deferring to his judgment in small ways. He never asked for recognition, never demanded praise. He simply performed his tasks with a steady confidence that slowly won respect. One evening, as the ship traveled through a dense field of glowing asteroid fragments, a younger alien approached him. "Why do you not speak much?" she asked, tilting her head. The human paused, considering. "Words are not always necessary," he said finally. "Observation and action often say more." She frowned, unsure of what he meant, but nodded thoughtfully. Around them, the ship hummed with the sound of machinery and the quiet murmurs of crew activity. The human continued his work, checking ingredient containers, adjusting temperatures, and preparing for the next meal. Even in the midst of a galaxy filled with unknown threats, he remained calm, focused, and entirely unshaken. Then, without warning, another alarm sounded. This one was different, sharper, more insistent, and accompanied by a faint tremor that ran through the ship. The crew froze, and the captain's eyes narrowed. The human, however, moved toward the control panels with the same quiet confidence he had shown before. He studied the readings, noting the subtle patterns in energy fluctuations and oxygen levels. He did not panic. He did not yell. He acted. Using a combination of makeshift solutions and techniques borrowed from the kitchen, he stabilized the system before anyone else could even react. By the time the immediate danger had passed, the crew looked at him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had saved them again without ceremony, without fanfare, and without speaking more than a few words. "You are remarkable," one officer said, finally breaking the silence. The human shrugged lightly. "Works for me," he said, a small smile curving his lips. It was a phrase he had begun to repeat, not out of pride, but because it felt true. He did what he could, and that was enough. That night, as the ship glided through the void, the human sat quietly in the galley, preparing a simple meal for himself. The aliens watched from a distance, unsure if they should approach or leave him alone. The smell of spices and warmth filled the room, a stark contrast to the cold metal of the ship's corridors. For the first time, some of the crew realized that humanity's strength was not in brute force, in loud commands, or in flashy technology. It was in observation, intelligence, and the ability to act decisively when needed. And the human, quiet as ever, continued his work. No one could say for sure what he was thinking, but they could see the results of his mind in action. Every dish, every adjustment to the ship's systems, every small gesture spoke louder than words ever could. He was calm, capable, and entirely unpredictable, a combination that no one on the ship had anticipated. By the end of the first week, the aliens had begun to whisper among themselves. They spoke of the human's quiet brilliance, of his uncanny ability to solve problems that no one else could, and of the strange comfort that seemed to follow him wherever he went. The captain, who had once been skeptical, now observed him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Perhaps humans were indeed more than they appeared. Perhaps there was a depth to them that other species had yet to understand, and through it all the human remained unassuming. He did not seek attention or accolades. He cooked, he observed, he acted. And every time someone praised him or expressed astonishment, he merely shrugged and said with calm conviction, "Works for me." The quiet confidence of the human had begun to change the ship. Little by little, he was teaching the aliens that strength was not always loud. That intelligence could be subtle. That adaptability and calm observation could be more powerful than the most advanced technology. And as the stars stretched endlessly beyond the ship's windows, the human prepared for whatever challenge might come next, ready to act in silence, with skill, and with the quiet pride of someone who knew that actions, not words, defined true capability. The ship moved steadily through the asteroid field, each fragment glowing faintly against the dark void. The human walked quietly along the corridors, his eyes scanning the walls, the panels, and the faint flickers of light from the consoles. The crew had grown used to his presence, but there was still an unspoken tension every time alarms sounded. He had saved them once and again, but now there was a sense that danger was creeping closer. Something beyond the stars had noticed their vessel. It began with the sensors picking up unusual energy signatures. The aliens crowded around the main console, clicking and gesturing, their voices rising in alarm. "It is approaching," one said, his long fingers trembling slightly. The human leaned over the panel, studying the readings. The patterns were erratic, like nothing the crew had ever encountered. He did not speak at first. He simply observed, tracing lines with his fingers, noting the pulses, the shifts, the changes in the field around the ship. "Captain," another officer said, his voice urgent, "it could be a scout fleet, or worse." The captain, still armored and imposing, did not respond immediately. He studied the human quietly, perhaps wondering what insight this quiet, unassuming species might offer. The human's brow furrowed slightly as he considered the readings. "It is not what you expect," he said finally, his voice calm, almost gentle. The aliens turned sharply, startled that he had spoken. "We cannot fight it with brute force," he continued. "We must be clever." The captain nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Then tell me, human, what is your plan?" The human looked out the observation window, his gaze sweeping across the glowing asteroids. "We use what we have, we adapt, we survive," he said simply. There was a pause, a wait in the silence as the aliens considered his words. They had been trained to respond with direct action, with overwhelming power or strategy they had learned over decades. But this human, he thought differently. The first contact came before anyone fully understood it. Small, sleek vessels emerged from the shadows of the asteroid field, glinting in the ship's lights. They moved quickly, weaving between the glowing rocks, their energy weapons ready. The alien crew tensed and the captain barked orders in clicks and hums. The human moved toward the galley, gathering containers, ingredients, and tools. The officers watched him, baffled. "What is he doing?" one whispered. "He cannot fight them with cooking." But the human did not hesitate. He worked quickly, combining substances, heating and mixing, testing and adjusting. It was as if he were preparing a meal, yet the result was far from food. Small containers were linked to the ship's systems, emitting vapor and chemicals that neutralized the incoming energy pulses. The aliens' weapons were powerful, yes, but the humans' creations disrupted their targeting systems, slowed their engines, and scrambled their communications. Within moments, the attacking vessels began to falter. One alien officer leaned toward the captain, his voice shaking. "Is he controlling them?" The captain could only shake his head, eyes fixed on the human. He had been trained to lead, to make decisions, yet here was a single human, quiet and unassuming, turning the tide of battle with tools no one else could have imagined. The human moved with calm precision, adjusting concentrations, recalibrating mixtures, and watching the effects unfold. Every small action had a ripple effect. The alien vessels attempted to regroup, but each move was anticipated. The human's understanding of patterns, of cause and effect, allowed him to manipulate the battlefield without leaving the galley. His silence was deceptive. It masked a mind that was analyzing, calculating, and acting faster than anyone else on the ship. A red light flashed on one console, signaling a critical hit to the ship's hull. Without hesitation, he grabbed a set of containers, combined substances, and directed a precise reaction that sealed the breach. The ship groaned, lights flickered, but no life was lost. Finally, the attacking ships began to retreat. The alien crew stared, mouths open in disbelief. They had faced enemies with superior firepower before, yet none had been turned back so completely by cooking. The human wiped his hands, shrugged lightly, and muttered, "Works for me." The captain stepped forward, his large frame imposing. "Explain yourself," he demanded. The human smiled faintly. "Observation, understanding, application," he said. "I use what I know, I act where I can." "That is all." The captain studied him, a mixture of awe and unease in his eyes. "Humans are strange," he said finally. "Quiet yet lethal in ways we do not expect." The human merely nodded, returning to his work, preparing a small meal for the crew. It was a simple gesture, but it reminded everyone that even in the midst of danger, life continued. Over the next few days, the crew worked to repair the ship and restock supplies. The human moved silently among them, observing weaknesses, suggesting subtle improvements, and performing small acts that made life aboard the vessel easier. He adjusted energy flows, optimized storage compartments, and even taught a few aliens simple techniques to improve their efficiency. He did not speak much, but his actions spoke volumes. Then the next challenge arrived. The ship passed through a region of space dense with electrical storms. Lightning-like bursts cracked across the void, and magnetic interference threatened to disable critical systems. The crew panicked, rushing to stabilize the ship, but the human remained calm. He traced the patterns of the storms, noting the intervals and intensities. Using tools and materials from the Galleon lab, he devised a method to channel the energy safely, redirecting it through non-critical systems and protecting the ship's core. The aliens watched, baffled and amazed. They had relied on technology, on calculations, on brute force, and yet here was a human, using knowledge learned from cooking, observation, and careful experimentation, to save them again. The storm passed, leaving the ship intact. The human cleaned his hands once more, shrugged, and said, "Works for me." By now, the crew had begun to understand that this phrase was not arrogance. It was simple truth. He did what he could, and it was enough. One evening, as the crew gathered to eat a meal prepared by the human, the captain approached him quietly. "You are unusual," he said. "I have seen humans before, but you are different." The human looked up, eyes calm. "I observe, I learn, I act." "That is all any human can do," he replied. The captain considered this, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps it is enough," he said. Around them, the crew ate in silence, a mixture of awe and curiosity in their expressions. Yet even as life seemed to stabilize, a new threat loomed. Sensors picked up a massive object approaching the ship, something larger, more complex, and far more dangerous than the previous attackers. The crew's fear was palpable. "It is a warship," one officer said, voice trembling. "We are outmatched." The human studied the readings, his mind racing. He did not panic. He did not hesitate. Instead, he began preparing, using every tool, every resource, and every ounce of ingenuity he possessed. He combined substances, crafted devices, and optimized systems, all while quietly preparing a meal for the crew. The aliens were baffled, unsure how to react. "Why does he continue to cook?" one whispered. "Now is not the time." But the human's calm focus had already altered the outcome. His preparations were not just for food, they were for survival. Every container, every ingredient, every adjustment had a purpose. As the massive warship drew closer, the human's subtle preparations began to take effect. Systems that had seemed vulnerable now worked perfectly. Shields held, energy flowed efficiently, and the crew moved with newfound confidence. They realized slowly that they were not outmatched. The human had turned what seemed like ordinary tasks into extraordinary advantages. When the warship finally arrived, its weapons ready, the aliens prepared for battle. But the human had already changed the rules. The first volleys missed entirely, disrupted by his careful manipulations. The crew adapted, following his quiet guidance, and the enemy was forced into retreat. The ship remained intact, and the crew realized once again that human ingenuity could not be measured by appearance or size. As silence returned to the ship, the human cleaned his workspace, a faint smile on his lips. "Works for me," he said quietly, almost to himself. The crew watched, still in awe, beginning to understand that this quiet, unassuming human had become the backbone of their survival. By the end of Part 2, the ship was safe, at least for now. But the human's capabilities had become clear to all aboard. Quiet, observant, adaptable, and unpredictable, he was not like anyone else they had encountered. And while the crew slept, The human prepared his tools, his ingredients, and himself, ready for the next challenge that would test his skill, his intelligence, and the very limits of what it meant to be human in a galaxy that had not yet learned to respect their quiet power. The ship drifted through the darkness of space, its hull scarred but intact from the recent encounter. The human walked quietly along the corridor, his eyes scanning every panel, every pipe, every glowing display. The crew had grown accustomed to his calm presence, but the captain remained wary. There was a new tension aboard, subtle but undeniable. Something about the approaching warship had disturbed even the most confident of the crew. They were strong, trained, and well-armed, but the human's quiet confidence suggested a different kind of strength, one that was not loud, not forceful, but precise and terrifying in its effectiveness. The sensors began to pick up unusual activity again. Small vessels, far faster and more agile than before, were weaving through space like a swarm of glowing insects. The aliens panicked, moving between consoles, giving orders and shouting calculations. The human did not speak. He walked to the observation window, eyes narrowing as he studied the patterns. They were predictable in their chaos. Each ship moved not randomly, but according to rhythms and habits that could be anticipated. The human's mind worked quickly, analyzing each pulse, each trajectory, each blink of light. He could see where they would strike, where they would falter, and how to turn their movements against them. "Captain," one officer said nervously, "they are too many. We cannot fight them directly." The human turned, his gaze calm but piercing. "Direct force is not always the answer," he said softly. "We use their patterns, we make them predictable, then we act." The captain paused, listening. Humans often acted differently than the aliens expected. Where they relied on overwhelming strength, humans relied on ingenuity, observation, and subtle manipulation. The human's calm confidence reminded the captain that sometimes intelligence was far more powerful than weapons. The first wave of the enemy approached, firing pulses that danced across space like ribbons of light. The ship shuddered under the impact, and the crew braced for damage. The human moved to the galley, gathering containers, ingredients, and lab tools. Some aliens watched him nervously. "He is not a warrior," one muttered. "What can he do?" The human did not respond. He worked quickly, combining substances, adjusting concentrations, and connecting them to the ship's systems. It was as if he were cooking a meal, yet the result was a defensive web of energy dispersal, interference fields, and reactive shields that no one had ever imagined. The first pulses hit the ship and were deflected, redirected, and absorbed by the human's improvised system. The enemy faltered, confused by the unexpected defenses. The human observed their reactions carefully, making small adjustments that amplified the effects. Every chemical, every container, every mixture had a purpose. By the time the second wave arrived, the enemy ships were already struggling, their movements disrupted and unpredictable. The aliens watched in awe as the human, quiet and calm, turned the tide without ever leaving the galley. Then the next test came. The enemy deployed a massive strike vessel, a hulking machine bristling with weapons and shields. The captain ordered a full response, but the human raised a hand. "Wait," he said simply. "We do not attack yet. We control the battlefield first." The captain frowned, but allowed him to proceed. The human analyzed the patterns of the strike vessel, predicting its energy discharges and movements. Using a combination of substances, makeshift devices, and precise timing, he created a trap that would exploit the vessel's predictable rhythms. When the strike vessel fired, the trap activated. Energy pulses were absorbed, reflected, and redirected back at the attackers. Systems overloaded, shields collapsed, and the massive ship was forced into retreat. The alien crew stared, stunned into silence. The human wiped his hands, shrugged lightly, and muttered, "Works for me." The phrase had become a quiet mantra aboard the ship, a reminder that calm observation and action could achieve what brute force could not. The captain approached him later, his expression unreadable. "How did you?" he began, but the human only smiled faintly. "I observe," he said. "I learn, I act where I can, that is all any human can do." The captain shook his head, a mixture of admiration and disbelief in his eyes. "You are not like any species I have encountered," he said finally. The human nodded and returned to his work, checking instruments, adjusting mixtures, and preparing for the next wave of challenges. In the following days, the ship faced constant skirmishes. Small fleets attempted to test its defenses. hoping to exploit weaknesses. Each time, the human anticipated their moves, using a combination of scientific knowledge, observation, and creativity to turn each attack into an opportunity. The crew began to follow his quiet guidance, trusting his instincts even when they did not fully understand them. They began to see that humans were different, not in strength, but in adaptability and ingenuity. During one particularly tense engagement, the ship's sensors detected a cloaked vessel approaching from an unexpected angle. The crew panicked, unsure how to respond. The human moved to the observation window, noting the faint energy signatures and subtle disturbances in the field. He instructed the crew to focus on indirect responses rather than direct fire. He combined materials in the galley, creating a reactive system that amplified minor fluctuations and revealed the hidden vessel's position. Within moments, the ship had neutralized the threat without firing a single conventional weapon. The aliens were amazed. They had been trained to respond with force, but the humans showed them a new way. Intelligence, observation, and creativity could defeat even the most technologically advanced threats. The captain approached him quietly afterward. "You have changed the way we see strategy," he said. The human smiled faintly. "Observation and action are not always loud," he said simply. "Sometimes quiet is stronger than noise." Despite the constant battles, the human maintained his calm demeanor. He continued to cook, clean, and prepare, observing the crew, the systems, and the universe around them. He never demanded praise, never sought recognition. His quiet presence had become a stabilizing force aboard the ship, reminding everyone that even in chaos, clarity and calm could prevail. One night, while the crew rested, the human sat quietly in the galley, preparing a simple meal. The stars outside shimmered, reflecting off the metal walls of the ship. A young alien approached him, curiosity in their eyes. "Why do you remain so calm?" they asked. The human looked up, his eyes steady. "Panic accomplishes nothing," he said. "Action, observation, and preparation are what matter. If you act without thought, you fail. If you observe and act wisely, you survive." The young alien nodded slowly, beginning to understand the quiet power of humanity. Days later, a message arrived from an allied fleet. They were under attack, outnumbered and desperate. The captain considered sending help, but the human intervened. "We do not need to rush blindly," he said. "We analyze, we act efficiently. We can save them with strategy, not reckless force." Using a combination of his own preparations, guidance for the alien crew, and subtle adjustments to the ship's systems, the human orchestrated a rescue that left the enemy confused and the allied fleet intact. The aliens began to realize that humans were more than simple creatures. They were observant, adaptable, and capable of extraordinary ingenuity. They did not rely on size, strength, or loud commands. They relied on intelligence, creativity, and calm precision. And the human aboard their ship embodied all of these qualities. By the end of the third week, the crew had come to respect and trust him completely. Even the captain, who had once been skeptical, now deferred to his judgment in critical moments. The human continued his quiet work, preparing meals, adjusting systems, and observing the universe outside the ship. Every action he took had a ripple effect, influencing the crew, the ship, and even the outcomes of battles. The human's calm confidence had begun to shift the culture aboard the vessel. Where once there was panic, now there was careful observation. Where once there was hesitation, now there was trust. And where once there was doubt, now there was respect. The human had shown that being quiet, unassuming, and observant could be just as powerful, if not more so, than the loudest weapons or the strongest fleets. One day, as the ship traveled through a nebula of swirling gases and light, the sensors detected a massive object approaching. It was unlike anything the crew had seen, a colossal vessel, heavily armed, and moving with precision that suggested intelligence and experience. The crew froze, unsure how to respond. The human, however, moved calmly to the observation window, eyes narrowing. He studied the patterns, the energy fluctuations, and the subtle movements of the ship. "We do not confront it directly," he said quietly. "We prepare, we adapt. We act where it least expects us." The captain nodded, knowing that the human's instincts had saved them more than once. The crew worked under his quiet guidance, setting traps, preparing defenses, and adjusting systems with careful precision. They followed his lead, trusting the calm human who had proven time and again that ingenuity could overcome overwhelming odds. When the colossal vessel finally arrived, it was met with defenses that anticipated its every move. Its attacks were neutralized, disrupted, and redirected. The human had turned the battlefield into a controlled environment, and the aliens could only follow his guidance. By the time the vessel retreated, exhausted and defeated, the crew realized once more that humanity's quiet intelligence was a force to be reckoned with. The human returned to the galley, cleaned his hands, and prepared a small meal. "Works for me," he said quietly, almost to himself. The phrase had become a symbol aboard the ship, not of pride, but of calm confidence, quiet ingenuity, and the power of observation and action. The crew watched in awe, understanding at last that this quiet human had become the key to their survival, the reason they had endured, and the embodiment of the strength that humans brought to the galaxy. The ship moved on, carrying a quiet hero whose words were few but whose actions spoke louder than any weapon. And as the stars stretched endlessly beyond the windows, the human prepared for the challenges to come, ready to act, ready to observe, and ready to prove again that humans were a species not to be underestimated. The ship floated silently through the black void, its hull still bearing the scars of previous encounters. Inside, the alien crew moved carefully, adjusting shields, checking systems, and monitoring sensors, but there was an unspoken tension. Something was coming, something different this time. The human walked through the corridors, quiet and observant as always, noting the small details, the way pipes vibrated, the subtle flickers in the power conduits, the faint hum of energy flowing unevenly. He did not panic. He never panicked. The first warning came through the sensors. A massive fleet was approaching, far larger than anything they had faced. It was organized, methodical, and heavily armed. The crew froze, fear gripping even the most experienced officers. "We are outnumbered," one said, his voice trembling. "We cannot win against them." The human stopped, placing a hand on a console. His calm presence seemed to radiate through the room. "Winning is not always about numbers," he said quietly. "It is about strategy, preparation, and using what others overlook. We have time, we have tools, and we have minds. That is enough." The captain standing behind him narrowed his eyes. "Explain," he said. The human pointed to the sensor readings. "Every fleet has weaknesses. Every formation has gaps. They rely on power, speed, and intimidation. They underestimate what we can do quietly with observation and ingenuity. If we act correctly, we can control them without losing a single life." The crew looked at him skeptically. Humans had saved them before, yes, but could one human's intelligence truly overcome an entire fleet? The human moved to the galley, collecting containers, ingredients, and tools. Some aliens followed him nervously, unsure what to expect. He began working quickly, combining substances and adjusting systems with deliberate precision. Each mixture, each combination, each action had a purpose. He was not cooking for hunger anymore, he was cooking for survival. The room filled with faint odors and vapor, and the aliens watched as he moved with the calm focus of someone who had done this countless times, yet whose mind was always a step ahead. As the enemy fleet drew closer, the human instructed the crew to take specific positions. "Do not fire unless directed," he said. "Observe their patterns, watch their reactions. Their strength is obvious, but their strategy is predictable." The aliens hesitated but obeyed. Over the past weeks, they had learned to trust him. Quiet, calm, unassuming, and yet deadly in intellect, the human had proven time and again that observation and action mattered more than brute force. The first wave of enemy ships arrived, sleek and fast. They fired pulses of energy that sliced through space, aiming to disable the ship. The crew braced, but the human remained calm. He activated his preparations, linking the galley systems to the ship's energy network in a way that redirected, neutralized, and reflected the attacks. The enemy was taken aback, their weapons ineffective against this strange and unexpected defense. "Keep watching," the human instructed. He moved from console to console, adjusting concentrations, realigning shields, and fine-tuning systems. Every pulse, every movement, every flicker of energy was anticipated and countered. The crew watched in awe as he orchestrated the ship's defense with a precision they had never imagined. He was not commanding with authority, he was commanding with understanding. Every calculation, every small adjustment had a ripple effect across the ship and the battlefield. Then the second wave arrived, larger, more aggressive, more dangerous. The human observed their formation, noting subtle weaknesses. "Their engines are synchronized," he said. "A small disruption in timing will throw everything off. Watch carefully." Using a combination of substances, controlled energy releases, and subtle environmental manipulation, he disrupted the synchronization. Enemy ships collided, their attacks misfired, and their coordination crumbled. The aliens stared, wide-eyed, realizing that one quiet human had changed the tide of battle again. The third wave was different. It was the fleet's flagship, a massive vessel bristling with weapons and shields. It moved slowly but with calculated precision, a force meant to intimidate and dominate. The humans studied it quietly, noting its energy pulses, shield patterns, and weapon discharge intervals. "We do not attack head-on," he said calmly. "We force them into a trap they cannot escape." He activated a network of improvised devices, linking galley materials to the ship's energy conduits. Vapors, pulses, and controlled reactions created a field that interfered with the flagship's targeting systems. The enemy flagship fired. Its weapons should have crushed the ship instantly, yet every pulse was absorbed, deflected, or redirected. The humans' adjustments were perfect, exploiting the flagship's predictable patterns. Shields held, systems stayed online, and the alien crew moved with confidence, guided by his quiet instructions. For the first time, they felt the power of human ingenuity in full force. The flagship attempted evasive maneuvers, but the human anticipated each move. Using subtle energy pulses, field distortions, and precise timing, he corralled the vessel into a position where its own attacks backfired. Explosions rippled across its hull, systems overloaded, and its shields collapsed. The aliens could only watch, stunned, as the massive ship surrendered to the effects of one human's quiet brilliance. When the battle ended, silence filled the ship. The enemy fleet had retreated, battered, confused, and defeated. The alien crew stared at the human, their expressions a mixture of awe, disbelief, and newfound respect. "How?" one officer whispered. The human wiped his hands, shrugged lightly, and said, "Works for me." The phrase had become more than words. It was a symbol of calm confidence, quiet intelligence, and decisive action. The captain stepped forward, his armored frame towering. "Humans are extraordinary," he said finally. "You have changed the way we fight, the way we think, and the way we survive." The human nodded, returning to his work as if the praise were unnecessary. "I observe," he said simply. "I learn, I act where I can." "That is all." The captain's eyes lingered on him, realizing that this quiet, unassuming human had done what fleets of warriors could not: win a battle without relying on brute force, intimidation, or sheer numbers. Over the next few days, the ship recovered from the battle. The human moved quietly among the crew, checking systems, adjusting controls, and preparing meals. Every action was purposeful, every gesture calm and precise. The crew had learned to trust him completely, following his instructions even when they did not fully understand them. His presence had transformed the ship from a vessel of panic and uncertainty into a disciplined, adaptable force capable of facing any challenge. One evening, the captain called a meeting in the observation room. The stars outside shimmered, casting reflections across the crew's faces. "Humans," he said, "we have relied on technology, power, and strategy for centuries. But today, we have learned that observation, intelligence, and calm action can achieve what force cannot. You have shown us a new way to fight, a new way to survive, and a new way to respect the strength of humanity." The human listened quietly, nodding slightly. "Strength is not always loud," he said. "It is not always measured in weapons or power. Observation, understanding, and action, these define true capability. Humans are not the strongest, but we adapt, we survive. We create solutions when others see only problems." The crew absorbed his words, realizing that his quiet confidence was a force unto itself, more powerful than many fleets combined. The ship moved on, its path through the stars calm but purposeful. The human continued his work, preparing meals, checking systems, and observing the universe around them. Every decision, every action, and every small adjustment was a testament to human ingenuity. The crew no longer questioned him. They followed, trusted, and respected him completely. And as the stars stretched endlessly beyond the windows, the human prepared for whatever challenge might come next. He had proven that humans could face overwhelming odds and prevail, not with power or loudness, but with intelligence, adaptability, and quiet determination. The galaxy had begun to notice, and the human, unassuming and calm, was at the center of it all, ready to act, ready to observe, and ready to remind the universe that humanity was not to be underestimated. By the end of Part 4, the alien crew had fully recognized the quiet brilliance of humanity. The humans' calm intelligence, adaptability, and ingenuity had not only saved them repeatedly, but had transformed their understanding of strategy, survival, and strength. And the human, modest as ever, returned to his work, preparing the next meal, observing, calculating, and quietly shaping the fate of the ship and its crew. The ship drifted through the quiet darkness of space, its hull glowing faintly with reflected starlight. After weeks of tension, skirmishes, and battles, the crew finally allowed themselves a moment of rest. Yet even in the calm, there was a sense of anticipation. Something had shifted in the galaxy. Word of humanity's ingenuity and quiet power had begun to spread, carried across communication networks, whispered by travelers, and recorded in logs. Humans were no longer underestimated. They were respected, feared, and carefully watched. The human walked slowly along the corridors, observing systems, reading displays, and noting minor inefficiencies. He moved with his usual quiet confidence, hands steady, eyes alert, taking in the rhythm of the ship and the crew. The aliens, once skeptical of his presence, now watched him with awe. Even those who had doubted him at first recognized the pattern. He was calm in chaos, precise in action, and remarkably creative in solving problems. He never rushed, never panicked, and never sought recognition. Yet every action had impact, every decision had consequence. The captain approached him, armor clinking lightly, and gestured toward the main observation window. "There is something," he said quietly, "on the outer edge of the system. A fleet unlike any we have seen. They are moving with purpose, not aggression, yet they are watching us." The human turned, eyes narrowing as he studied the distant ships. They were sleek, organized, and heavily armed. Their movements were deliberate, like hunters circling prey. The crew tensed, uncertainty rippling through them. "We will not engage blindly," the human said calmly. "We observe first, then act. Understanding is more powerful than strength." His words carried the weight of certainty, and slowly the crew relaxed under his guidance. Over the next few hours, he analyzed the fleet's patterns, noting small anomalies, subtle hesitations, and predictable behavior. "They expect fear," he said softly. "They expect us to react with panic or aggression. We will do neither. We will act where they do not anticipate." The human began preparations immediately. In the galley, containers, substances, and tools were arranged with precision. The aliens watched as he moved quickly, combining ingredients, adjusting temperatures, and preparing devices. It was like watching a master chef in action, yet the results were far beyond cooking. Vapors, pulses, and controlled reactions were linked to the ship's systems, creating a web of defensive and offensive capabilities. The human worked with calm purpose, anticipating every potential threat, every possible move the enemy might make. As the fleet drew closer, small warning signals flickered across the consoles. The aliens braced for impact, expecting chaos. The human, however, remained steady. He monitored energy pulses, shield fluctuations, and movement patterns, making subtle adjustments that maximized efficiency and minimized risk. The enemy fleet fired their first volleys, but the humans' preparations turned the attack into a display of failure for them. Pulses were deflected, engines disrupted, and communications scrambled. The alien crew watched, wide-eyed, as their ship maneuvered effortlessly through a storm of energy, guided by the quiet human whose calm intellect had become their greatest weapon. The flagship of the approaching fleet moved forward, massive and imposing, weapons bristling. The human studied its energy pulses and timing, predicting its moves before the enemy could act. Using a combination of improvised devices and clever manipulation of the ship's systems, he created a trap that forced the flagship into a narrow corridor between asteroid clusters. Each step, each adjustment, each pulse was precise, calculated, and deliberate. The enemy flagship became entangled in its own calculations, weapons firing harmlessly into empty space, shields fluctuating unpredictably. The alien crew could not believe what they were witnessing. One officer whispered, "It is impossible. How can one human do this?" The human only nodded slightly, adjusting a panel here, connecting a conduit there, and observing with calm eyes. His mind worked faster than the crew could follow, processing information, anticipating movements, and converting observation into action. Every element of the ship, from engines to shields to improvised energy redirection, was orchestrated seamlessly. It was not strength, nor power, nor aggression. It was intelligence. Then the enemy attempted a final maneuver, sending a coordinated strike from multiple vessels simultaneously. The human anticipated it. With subtle adjustments to the ship's energy flows, combined with controlled reactions from his improvised devices, he turned the attack against itself. Energy pulses collided mid-space, engines overloaded, and the enemy vessels were forced into retreat. The battle ended without a single loss to the crew. Silence fell over the ship, broken only by the hum of engines and the faint vibrations of energy systems. The aliens stared at the human in awe. You have done what no fleet has accomplished before," the captain said, his voice low. "You have won without firing our strongest weapons, without engaging in reckless combat, and without even demanding command." The human smiled faintly. "Observation, understanding, and action," he said. "That is how humans survive. That is how we prevail." Over the next several days, the ship made repairs, resupplied, and prepared for the next journey, yet the impact of the encounter lingered. The alien crew, once dismissive of humans as weak and simple, now recognized the quiet power of their ingenuity. Humans were not the strongest, nor the loudest, but they were adaptable, creative, and capable of extraordinary solutions when others failed. The human moved among them, still quiet, still unassuming, yet every action carried authority born of competence. During one meal, a young alien approached him, curiosity shining in their eyes. "How do you always know what to do?" they asked. The human looked at them with calm patience. "I watch," he said simply. "I learn, I understand, and then I act. Fear and noise cloud judgment. Observation clears it. Action without thought is failure. Thoughtful action is survival." The young alien nodded, beginning to understand the quiet brilliance that humans brought to the galaxy. As the ship continued its journey, messages arrived from distant systems. Reports spoke of humans in other fleets, quietly solving impossible problems, saving lives, and turning dire situations into victories. They had become legends, not for force or aggression, but for intelligence, creativity, and calm confidence. Entire species had begun to reconsider the underestimated humans, realizing that they were more dangerous and capable than anyone had imagined. The captain called a meeting in the observation room. The crew gathered, eyes reflecting starlight and admiration. "This human has shown us that power is not only strength, not only weapons, not only fleets," he said. "It is intelligence, creativity, and calm resolve. We have been led by him through challenges we thought impossible. He has proven that humans, though quiet and unassuming, are a force that cannot be ignored." The human, seated quietly at a console, nodded slightly. He did not seek praise. He did not demand recognition. His actions had already spoken louder than words ever could. The journey continued, but the human remained vigilant. Sensors were monitored, systems checked, and small improvements made at every opportunity. His quiet presence inspired confidence, his calm intelligence guided the crew, and his ingenuity transformed ordinary actions into extraordinary results. He prepared meals, adjusted energy flows, and observed patterns in both the crew and the universe. Every action had purpose, every gesture carried meaning, and every calculation contributed to survival. The alien crew now followed him without question. They moved in sync with his guidance, trusting the quiet human who had repeatedly turned impossible situations into victories. They had learned that loud commands, overwhelming power, and aggression were not always the answer. Calm observation, intelligent action, and adaptability could achieve more than any weapon or fleet. Humanity had proven that, and the crew had witnessed it firsthand. One night, as the stars stretched endlessly outside the windows, the human prepared a simple meal. The crew gathered, reflecting on the journey, the battles, and the victories. The captain approached him, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You have shown us what humans can do," he said. "We will remember this, we will respect this, and we will follow your guidance whenever we can." The human smiled faintly, shrugging slightly. "Works for me," he said quietly, returning to his meal. That simple phrase had become more than words. It was a symbol of calm confidence, quiet intelligence, and decisive action. It was humanity in essence, adaptable, clever, and capable of remarkable feats when others doubted them. The galaxy had learned a lesson that would ripple for decades. Do not underestimate humans, no matter how quiet or unassuming they may appear. The ship moved on, carrying a crew forever changed by the quiet human who had led them through chaos, danger, and impossible odds. He continued his work, observing, calculating, and acting with calm precision. The stars stretched endlessly before them, filled with unknown challenges, new civilizations, and opportunities for ingenuity. And the human, quiet as ever, prepared to face them all, proving again and again that humanity's strength lay not in noise or aggression, but in thought, action, and the brilliance of an unassuming mind. By the end of the journey, the aliens understood fully. Humans were a force of ingenuity, creativity, and quiet power. They could survive, adapt, and prevail where others failed. And the human, humble and silent, continued to lead by example, his actions defining what it truly meant to be strong in a galaxy that had once underestimated him. The story closed with him preparing another meal, watching the stars, and ready for whatever challenge awaited, confident, unassuming, and unstoppable in his quiet brilliance.